Hey guys, George Mesa, Third Eye Edify podcast. And I've said it before, but this time it means more than usual. I am beyond excited to have Nicole Mesa here with us, my wife, to talk about the incredible journey that she's had recently and what led up to it and why you guys all need to know who she is. She has so much to say about so many different topics, so many great insights about things, a lot of experience with all kinds of things in the world, and I'm being very broad on purpose. Let's get her on. And Nicole, welcome to the show. It's about time for sure. We have amazing talks all the time. We've got to get these recorded and let everyone know a little bit about yourself. And
Yeah, hi everybody. It's very exciting to finally be here after quite a long time of being asked to come on. And it's a lovely evening for a take two. And so I'm very happy to be here and share my experiences and my point of view on something that I'm extremely passionate about, which is physiological childbirth.
excellent. And I'm sure everyone notices that there are quite a few titles below you. So I think what we'll do is we'll start with a very important distinction to make for people that aren't sure about some of the things that we're going to be talking about, just to clarify, just to have some context, and then we'll give you a chance to kind of run through most, if not all, of the labels underneath your face there. So I really think that before we even get into the conversation about your inspirations for wanting to do this, the way the world has been lately, especially the past 100 years with entertainment and before, as we'll get into all that. But I think it's really important that we make a clear distinction and label as best as possible without, of course, avoiding the fact that it turns into so many different things no matter what. You never know, I'm sure. Doula and midwife. I really am noticing that there's a lot of confusion between the terms. They get kind of thrown around as one or the other. A lot of people think they're the same exact thing. So please give us a relatively brief distinction between the two.
Sure. So, doulas, there are more than one kind of doula. There's birth doulas. There are postpartum doulas. A lot of birth workers that work as doulas do both. There are also bereavement doulas that a lot of people don't know about. So that's kind of really interesting to think about. But really what doulas do is they play a supportive role in pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum. So a lot of physical support, a lot of guidance, communication is usually always open, as at least between my clients and I always am available to talk to. Education is a big part of my services as a doula during the pregnancy period. And as far as midwives go, a friend of mine the other day had just said something really interesting, that midwives are people who know what to do with her hands, is a person who knows what to do with her hands. Of course, when hands are needed, which is not most of the time. But when hands are needed, it's important to know and possess the skills, the training, the experience, and the education needed to address whatever might be coming up.
Good, good. That reminds me of something I'll never forget, of course, that I witnessed you catch our very own baby yourself as you were giving the birth. So it doesn't have to be where, you're just kind of laying there as it's often portrayed, and then whoever's there takes over and does everything for you except the pushing and the pain. which is how it seems when you watch a movie or a TV show, you know? So that's well said. That's interesting. The interesting way to put it. But
Right.
there's so many things that there's so many things to mention and to, because you did a good job of being brief about it actually, and there's so much more. Of course, never want
Surprisingly,
to.
yes.
Yeah, there's no. You're not here to be. I don't want you on here to be brief, but no, for that moment, maybe we just wanted an overview, ideas. For example, up until let's say, I don't know, third trimester. I'm being again. I'm being fairly broad here, but you end up talking to your doula far more than your midwife. Would you agree with that? As you're having more of a conversation about daily tips or weekly tips, monthly ideas.
I think that it's different for, depending on the midwife and the doula. It's you create a very personal relationship between your clients, and some midwives do a lot of typical doula work, for lack of better words,
Mhm.
and do offer support like that and are available for questions. And there are other types of midwives that, have a call service, after hour call service, and you
Mhm.
get to speak to an on-call doctor. And, not all midwives are made the same. Some are very highly medicalized. Some work in practices with doctors, and others don't. Others work independently, only in a home setting, um, you know, out of their own office or their own home for prenatal visits. It can look a lot of different ways. So,
Mm. Good, good. Well, I'm at the same time asking for the audience and myself sometimes because I still don't know everything about it too. It's a very, very, very large topic with all kinds of overlapping concepts, medical or otherwise. And I guess something that I think would be really worth discussing now also is how how much if when you ask for a home birth and you know that's what you want, regardless of why, how much does the midwife bring to the home as far as the things that I assume a lot of people think are completely missing from the home births versus when you go to the hospital? How much of the hospital actually comes to you in these settings? Is it a lot? Is it barely any?
uh,
I know it varies per midwife, of course,
it
but
does.
they're heavily
That's,
trained.
oh yeah, definitely. I mean, midwives, you know, there's a lot of confusion. You know, there's a lot of different type of birth workers out there. And some midwives, train differently than others. Some choose to go straight into an apprenticeship and learn that way. Some become certified nurse midwives. So they're actually they have nursing degrees first and foremost, and then they go on to complete a midwifery uh,
Hmm.
part of their education. Um, but part of that training is apprenticeship and learning by doing and learning by observing, and actually being present for birth and witnessing. Um, and that's something that also looks at that can look 1,000 different ways, but um, it can be kind of tricky because there's a lot of people out there that are working as midwives, whether they call themselves midwives or not, or birth keepers or doulas, but they are attending births and don't necessarily have the experience or the training or the education or any of the things that um, really, if you're going to carry yourself in such a role, somebody should have. So it's really important to be aware of that, and ask if you're somebody that is looking for support in any way, and you feel like you need a midwife with you. for your home birth, then it's important to have that transparency. And some people don't. So it's important to ask what somebody's training is and what somebody's experience is.
Right, because I know you weren't necessarily heading there, but you can technically have a home birth without a midwife. It's not like a guarantee, right?
Sure,
Some
you can
people
do whatever you
you can do
want.
whatever you want. Well, this is definitely true, and that's actually part of what's amazing about the course that you're in, the training you're in now. But we'll get to that down the line.
Yeah, I think that people don't realize that they have choice because it's been taken away from us, and we've been so out of touch with our own bodies and our own power for so long that it's become foreign to us. But getting back to what your actual question was, is there are some midwives who carry medication and IVs and certain things on them, and there are midwives that choose not to do that for whatever valid reason they may have. And they may only carry herbs on them, herbal tinctures and herbal remedies and things like that. There are midwives that choose to carry none of that. But again, those are the things that need to be asked. Things that you, as the woman going through this experience, this transformation, needs to know and prioritize. What is important to you. What do you feel like you need from your birth support, from your birth team? And some women are okay with just having a birth keeper there, or a midwife that only has herbs or whatever on them. And some people are not. There's every experience is different for everybody. And, I think that the important thing is not only knowing that you have a choice, but knowing what the possibilities are, what your options are, so that you know what questions to ask and how to go about, putting your birth team together and, discovering what your experience is going to look like for you.
Right, right. Yeah, because the Western approach lately, well, lately, as in the past, let's just say 100 years just to put an obvious number on it, maybe read half a book and then that's all you do. Everyone else does the medical system does the rest. So now people are starting to realize, hey, I have complete control over this. I should find out as much as I can. I don't have to take the first one I interview, things of that nature. So it's great that the awareness is really growing. And at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, the stigma and the so-called witch hunt is also growing. So we have to get to all those things a bit later. But before we move on to any of that, because we actually went a little longer in the opening here of the initial topic, but you know what? There's still plenty of people, and potentially my audience included, that really don't know a lot about all of these things, even if they've had birth before, even if they've had a home birth. So let's talk about where your experience lies, because you've been on the inside, and now you're from the outside looking back in. As it says, former nurse down there, by choice, of course, and other reasons. And I think maybe you should tell everyone, when did this all start for you? When did you know that this path was going to be the one for you?
Well, I mean, even as a child, I always had these feelings, these intuitive feelings of even not really knowing what I was going to do with my life, but I just knew that whatever it was larger than myself. And when one of my best friends had her first birth, that was back in 2009. It was a real eye opener for me. It was the first time that I had already had my first birth. My son was already 6 months old at the time, but it was the first time that I got to see it through the lens of the supportive role. And it was such a privilege to be able to be there with her. And even at that moment, like seeing things that I didn't understand, or I just didn't agree with, things that just like, I wasn't in the medical field at that time, but things that just made me feel like sick to my stomach in the hospital. And um, it really put me down this path of being called to birth work in particular. And so, but supporting my friend in that was so rewarding for me. And it was just such an honor to be able to experience that alongside of her. But I then became a nurse. I was a licensed practical nurse from 2010 until about a year or so ago. So over a decade in the medical field, spanning from many different specialties, but excelling in OBGYN. And my latest endeavor, I guess, in the medical field was in OB triage in an outpatient setting. So I was dealing with a lot of routine lab work and sonograms and diagnostic testing and emergency phone calls and a lot of different things. And I just started to fall out of alignment, or I started to realize that I was not in alignment with the system in which I worked, rather. So there were things that I had to, do. I couldn't recommend very simple things because it was not FDA regulated or approved, or there's just like such a lack of choice. It was like I couldn't give the information and the things that I knew to these women in order for them to make decisions on their own, which is what informed consent is. So, it was kind of not a part of my job, even though they swore that it was.
Right.
And
That's a good point.
yeah, so I decided that, the time was right. I had already actually, I had continued for my RN several years before that, with the intention of becoming a certified nurse midwife to further down the line. And that did not work out. And it seems like anytime I tried to take a step further into the system, the universe was just like, this is not for you. So it was discouraging for a little while, until I realized that it wasn't that I'm not meant to be a birth worker. I'm just not meant to be that type of birth worker. And yeah, it was eye-opening. So there's a tremendous lack of choice, a tremendous lack of education, and I'm not really about that. So I decided to become a doula, a birth doula. I had already supported several friends during their pregnancies and births. So it was kind of like a natural step into birth work for me. I took a training. It was basically already things that I knew, and I chose not to become certified, because certification for being a doula is not really a thing, even though they make it a thing. It's not really like a legal thing. And I wasn't in alignment with that either. I didn't really need a piece of paper to tell me that I knew what I was doing and that I was good at what I do. So I chose not to continue with that. But um, I think another big realization coming from the medical fields and stepping into like this more natural childbirth role is the realization that my experience in nursing was led by ego. And I definitely at first had this kind of savior complex that so many providers in the medical system have, which is a lot of the time why people go to get their white coat in the first place, because they want to help, but they really want to save people. And what I am learning is, and what I'm working with clients is educating them in order to make the best decisions for themselves. So, kind of like the opposite.
Hmm.
Nobody needs to be saved. When they have the right education, especially. And it's like I was saying before, greater than myself. It's it comes from a higher calling, a higher power, and it's for the soul collective. There's a tremendous wound that needs to be healed, and that's what I'd like to contribute to with this work.
That's wonderfully said. Really, really wonderful. And I think it shows. Oh, first of all, my personal opinion about how in touch with your world I think you are. I really think that a lot of people may have read the signs you received the wrong way, or may have been steered down the wrong path because of it, because that's the nature of our culture in general. This is being recorded in 2023 in the United States, just in case anyone needs context. And there seems to be this whole, just to quote Michael Hoffman in one of his newest books, or his newest book, it's like a death cult out there. They want you to be afraid to have children. They want you to think it's like a very painful and awful process, trauma of birth. And they want you to think that, if you have another kid, you're going to add to climate change. You're going to destroy the world. You're going to destroy the planet. Your grandparents, your parent, your kids, no, not your kids, your friends and family are all going to suffer because you made this bad decision to have a kid. It's unbelievable. It's disgusting. And I think, hopefully, the past few years with good old COVID has shown people a lot more than they expected to know about things like the medical industry, things like how we're guided through entertainment and through cultural norms and stigmas to make decisions, to think that we're educated about a decision just because we're doing what everyone else does, what technically is the right thing to do. It's pretty crazy. And you were there and you were working during COVID as an OB triage nurse. And
Yeah,
some pretty negative things happened that prove what what the conspiracy theorists say about what the shot was doing to people. I think maybe we should touch on that for just a moment. I know it's a touchy subject.
it is. But yeah, COVID was crazy for so many different reasons, is
Yeah.
crazy for so many different reasons. But yeah, I worked through COVID. Um, and I mean, at first there were no vaccines, so it was really just a bunch of bundled up confusion and what do we tell people? And the panic and the fear was just unbearable. And the lack of support, was unbearable also. But I mean, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Well, it's okay.
It's like something that I tried to put so far from my mind, um, because it was just so devastatingly exhausting. but but I mean, the biggest takeaway that I saw was the increase in miscarriages, and once the vaccine did roll out, and I seem to be the only one that really felt that way uh, about a lot of things. But yeah, I wasn't allowed to recommend like any herbal kind of remedy or, you know, anything, any basic kind of, care, health care. Um, but I was instructed to, refer people to the ACOG recommendations for pregnant women with the vaccine, which of course recommended the vaccine to pregnant women. And that was kind of where I just drew the line. And I was like, yeah, I'm done with this.
Most
But
most real people would, stop you in your tracks.
yeah,
So what can you tell everyone ACOG is, in case they don't know?
sure. ACOG is the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And they kind of like are the big wigs of the OBGYN establishment in the United States.
And they also
um,
recommended the shot.
oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
of course.
Well, this conversation doesn't necessarily have to go much further in this direction, but it's worth mentioning that you have firsthand, witness, and also you actually were receiving the protocols to tell people to do this stuff, which is, it's really painful. And
Yeah,
also,
and I mean, again, it was, really just fear controlling everybody. And, the lack of clinical information that was available. Nobody really knew what to tell anybody.
right.
So,
No answers, and most times not the right question either, regardless if there was an answer. It was that's the level of confusion and fear there was. And I really think that can segue us into a further discussion about the idea of fear controlling people. And I say entertainment very often because it is a huge part of what molds our culture. It really is. That television that we all grew up with, and now the phones, obviously, really, it's crazy. But entire, entire continents of people can think a certain way about something just because of a movie, or just because of the way that you're raised to think something. It doesn't
sure.
mean that it doesn't mean that it's right. And
Well, when birth,
yeah,
something as natural as birth is portrayed as scary and I like blood curdling, screaming, painful, and unbearable, and as if we're not meant to experience this very spiritual and transformative process, you naturally, when you're afraid of things like that, it doesn't matter how natural it is or normal it is. You only see the abnormal. You only see things, scary things, bad things, things going wrong, and unrealistically, painful and, in fear, you relinquish your control. And so why wouldn't people be more comfortable going into a hospital and giving their choice over to a doctor who you have been taught your entire life knows better than you about this because they went to school for it and they learned about it. Um,
trust
and
the science,
right,
as always.
right. Trust the experts, not you, the woman who was divinely created and designed specifically to birth children. Trust the white coat in the room who does not even possess the anatomy to do what you do. So,
Right.
fear leads a lot of people off of the ledge, so to
Right.
speak.
Yeah.
And it's a shame, but I mean, I just try to educate. Like for me, a lot of it comes back to education and open conversation and not being afraid to have a voice about it, because it is scary to talk about. When you're a student midwife who's not planning on becoming licensed, and it can be very scary. Um, you don't know. The witch hunt that you were talking about is a real thing for sure. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that it's not just midwives, versus other people in the healthcare industry or the government. It's midwives versus midwives also.
Mhm.
There's a lot of um, there's a lot of really painful backstabbing circumstances that come up um, at times. So
And sometimes it comes down to things like certification, right? Just that simple concept. I know it goes well beyond that, but even that alone is getting the
yeah,
finger pointing right away, right?
right.
Maybe we'll get to the licensure and certification. I think we'll end up talking about that today too. But some of the fear, I said entertainment, but there's also real news headlines that come out, and not only are they, of course, very misleading on purpose to create fear, to make sure more people go to the hospital no matter what, whether they let your birth partner in or not, and it the articles themselves are. I want you to explain it because you have the more of the expertise than I do. But there was this one particular article that we read about, and they said, midwife kills her kids and commits suicide, and it was there was so much more to the story, and it was improperly labeled to begin with. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. I mean, it's exactly what you said. The headline like clearly read, um, midwife kills children, kills self. And when you actually read the article, um, it comes out that she wasn't an actual midwife. She was a registered nurse on labor and delivery, which is not the same thing at all. So, yeah, there's a lot of misleading things in the media, whether it's in entertainment or on the news. And again, it really comes back to fear. Um, they want you in the hospitals. They want their profit, to be made. And that's really what it comes down to. That really is what the bottom line is profit. Even these doctors and these healthcare providers that really care, the bottom line is that they're working for a system that only cares about profit.
Hmm. That's right.
So, and control. So, it's a broken system no matter what way you slice it.
Right. And it's also fear, and it's often quite understaffed regardless of all that profit. And
It was understaffed prior to COVID. Yeah.
right. This is before, yes, it's always been that way.
It's just devastating.
Right. All these good caring people can't even give the care they want.
No, and you pre-COVID, you were seeing, you would go into a doctor's office and you'd still wait an hour
Mhm.
to be called in, only to see your doctor for maybe 10 minutes.
Mhm. Sure.
That's
Remember,
not
don't forget any
healthcare.
questions you had to ask, and it's over before you even
That's
fill in
not
blank.
healthcare. They
Right.
want to see the numbers on a chart and analyze you in a clinical sense, and that is the extent of healthcare
Right.
to so many of these people. And I'm sure like many or most people have heard the saying, There's nothing sacred anymore. Uh, and especially with childbirth is absolutely true. The
Right.
spirituality and the sacred aspect of childbirth has been, you know, pretty much eliminated in the modern medical uh, system. So,
Right. And the most ancient thing of all time, delivering babies, suddenly it's essentially it's reserved for, hippies and witches and conspiracy theorists. That's part of, the message they try to push on it. And it's
right.
anything but that. And I trust a witch over a lot of doctors, to tell you that. We should quickly mention right now that there are plenty of amazing, very caring people in these places, and that we are not offering medical advice of any kind right now. We really are just trying to bring light to some very disturbing topics that are, it's getting worse at a pretty crazy rate. And there's always that silver lining that people mention about COVID, where more people are aware now. It's very true, but the percentage is still low. And another thing I think now that we're discussing and really in depth with the medical system as it is, C-sections. What's going on with all these C-sections? Are they kind of pushing for them? Are they trying to make them happen more often than they should? And why, if that's the case?
Sure. So, I mean, we live in a country where we have uh, ridiculously high cesarean section rates. And a lot of it is for profit. A lot of it comes down to the doctor's preference,
Hmm.
their schedule, what's easiest for them. It's just become so normal that people just don't think twice about it. Meanwhile, it's major abdominal surgery.
Hmm.
It's not typically easy to recover from. Um, and I mean, I think that it is, unique to the provider. I know some doctors that, they really don't push for C-sections,
Mm.
but the other side of that coin is, when is a C-section really, really, really necessary? And when are we just afraid of the situation becoming a liability or a lawsuit,
Mm.
and it's easier to get this baby out via C-section?
Right. Even if vaginal birth is totally plausible, it could end up being that. And that sounds like fear is on the ticker again. So it's really,
Absolutely, yeah.
it comes down to it's the same process every time. They put you through the same, they kind of, they nod there. Just like when they try to get you to, it's the same thing when they try to get you to biggie size your fries. They like, do you want a biggie size for 50 cents? And they're like, do you want to go in for the C-section now? It's really,
Well, you have, this culture that, fear of childbirth has become normal from our entertainment and things that, like, we were just talking about. And you have these medical providers that live in absolute fear of being sued. So it's the perfect combination. Well, you're afraid to have a vaginal birth, and I'm afraid to have a lawsuit. It's easier to just cut you open and rip this baby out of your body. So, you know,
no exaggeration. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty harsh. And what about I think we should quickly touch on this too, the concept of, having the birth when you're supposed to, when you naturally, your body is ready to do it at that moment, as opposed to being induced, let's say, at the hospital where maybe they're just rushing it forward so you're not there for another 2 days. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit too? I feel like that's part of this category.
yeah, I mean, induction of labor, they happen for many different reasons. Some medically necessary reasons, some just because you're over your due date. And again, doctors are afraid of having some kind of liability.
Hmm.
It could be something like that. But that's different than an augmentation of labor, which is using basically the same medication, with pitocin, which is synthetic oxytocin, which is the hormone that your body secretes
Hmm.
um, when in order for you to give birth.
Right.
And instead of using it to induce labor and get it started, they're using it to speed up your natural labor.
That sounds very unnatural. That sounds like a
Oh
bad
yeah,
idea. I'm sure there's
it
a time
sounds
and a
very
place that's very
unnatural.
needed. It,
Yeah, it just sounds like, it can lead to so many um, problems,
Mhm.
potential problems, and a plethora of further medical intervention. And it does much of the time cause problems. And, everything is with risk. And a lot of people are under the impression rather that, you're safe in a hospital and medical interventions because they're done routinely
Mhm.
doesn't mean that they are not without consequence and not without their own risks. But informed consent, again, is not really something that is being done thoroughly. Um, they may very quickly go over the risks and, talk, even the tone that they go over it with
Mhm.
you is just like, oh, yeah, well, you could have this happen. Oh, you're going to get an epidural. Well, your blood pressure might drop out. Like, they don't talk about it as if it's a serious consequence that can actually happen to you. And that does happen. Um, they carry themselves a certain way.
Mm. Yes.
And if you're lucky enough to catch them say it to you verbally, that's kind of on the off chance.
Mhm.
Um, and the rest is really up to you to read on your own off of a consent form, which
Right.
nobody ever does. Nobody ever sits there for 15 minutes reading a consent form and actually knowing what you're signing. So
And you know
just
that
because things are routine don't mean that they are safe or
no,
normal.
definitely not, or and definitely not natural. That's for sure.
Certainly.
Because nature, being the key part of that word, is really the main focus of all this. And nature has a way of not doing what you'd like it to sometimes, and nothing's perfect.
Sure.
Our last birth was a home birth, and as amazing and beautiful as the whole thing was for me personally, there were there was something that came up, and it wasn't perfect. And we maybe we'll have some time to talk about that near the end. But I think this what we just discussed about what happens in the hospital might be a really good thing to also mention another key factor of one of the biggest differences between having your birth in the medical system and having it outside of the system with a midwife, doula, home birth is postpartum care and the things that you shouldn't do, which are basically anything except lay there with your baby skin to skin. Can you talk about some of the biggest problems with Western culture as far as that goes? As the whole, like, get back to work in 2 weeks or less as soon
Yeah.
as you have your baby.
Well, we don't live in a culture that supports mothers, parents, but new mothers or their babies. Um, there is, um, again, the sacred aspect of this very important, very spiritual and transformative time is just totally absent from this culture. Um, there are other cultures where you have, you know, however long, a set amount of time where you are expected to care for yourself, however that culture, whatever that means to them. But, you don't leave the house and you don't, you're not working and you're not taking care of other children and you're not running your households. You are uh, paying attention to yourself and your healing. And, um, we have a tremendous issue with postpartum depression in this country and, maternal mental health. And at the same time, we have no support for our moms. So, those two things are going to go hand in hand. Um, in a hospital, you typically, before COVID, you had, 2 or 3 nights, depending on the hospital protocol.
Hmm.
You had a 2 to 3 night stay before they sent you home if your baby was not losing too much weight, if you checked all of their boxes, and you could both go home. Since COVID, they've been doing like a 24-hour kind of turnaround time. When we had our daughter, she was born in a hospital, and it was a lovely birth experience, by the way. You can absolutely have a beautiful experience in a hospital setting. That being said, we were gone less than 24
Yep, less
hours.
than 24 hours. I was just
I
going to
don't
say
even
that
think it
too,
was
less.
a full 24 hours after she was
Mhm.
born.
Definitely.
Um, and, that was it.
And my
Okay,
friend working
cool.
there right down the hall couldn't even visit us, of course. I'm like, oh,
No,
my friend's right next door. Let's see if he can come. He's like, I can't leave. They won't let me back on shift. Oh my God.
no.
That was, I'm sure most of us remember all that stuff. But yeah, there's,
Well, one of the things that COVID did do also was, we saw an increase in home birth inquiries and women, trying to choose home birth. I think that a lot of people I know couldn't find a midwife because everybody was trying to look into their options, which
Mhm.
I guess is one positive thing from the whole fucked up ordeal. But
Yeah.
but yeah, because women were being forced to birth by themselves alone in a hospital. Um, if they were positive for COVID, they were absolutely not allowed to touch their baby, see their baby, look at their baby. There were a lot of things happening in the hospitals that were just very demeaning and dehumanizing. And so we did see a lot of people, at least in our area, um, where we were at the time, choosing home birth.
And I think we're no longer there, but we were in New York. And it seems like a lot of people, even though they were taking that first step to getting away from the medicalized approach, they were still making sure you were certified, making sure you were a certain way, as close to a white coat doctor as humanly possible, right? So it was a step in the right direction, regardless. But maybe we can quickly touch on that licensure and certification, the idea of a PMA and having an appropriate relationship versus one with oversight and, you know, rules and regulations.
Yeah. So, I mean, first and foremost, I think it's really important to acknowledge the fact that just because you're a home birth midwife does not mean that you are not medicalized.
Right.
And there are many midwives that are very hands-on, for lack of better words, and very much modeled in the same way as OBGYNs. So, and that can be hard to break from. It could be hard to find somebody that's not like that, depending on where you are. But it's not impossible. And it just might take a little work. But
Mhm.
um, but yeah, there are midwives that choose not to be licensed, not to hold a license for many valid reasons. Again, and some of them work under different things like PMAs, private membership associations, or FBOs, faith-based organizations. And I'm still in the middle of learning like the intricate differences between the two, um, because there's a lot to them. But I mean, I don't know. I liked how you described the PMA. I think that was pretty um, to the point.
The cigar store?
Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone doesn't know, think about it this way. Where, again, we came from New York. You weren't allowed to smoke indoors. I'm not sure if you can anywhere in the country anymore. You're not allowed to smoke cigarettes or anything indoors. But if you walk into one of these cigar shops, can light up just 20 people smoking at the same time. How is this possible, right? You walk in, it's a PMA. There's an agreement between you and the owner of that place that you're not looking to follow those rules, and you don't mind that they're doing it, and they are allowing you to do it since you were there to do that, obviously. So there's ways around any law at all. There's a whole bunch of things that come with that, and there'll be maybe a whole nother topic for that. A show I was on a few years ago, Crow, he had some great information about that, and that might I think segue nicely into what you're doing now, radical midwifery, with Maryn Green's incredible course at indiebirth.org. I'll certainly leave a link in the show notes. But why don't you talk about how this all came to be and how you are where you are now, and this awesome place that you're going, and you've had an incredible journey. I'm just so happy to be part of it. I'm actually quite honored. Thank you for being you. I'm sporting this pretty fancy shirt of us in case anyone didn't notice. This is us. I haven't worn this in a few years, actually. Yeah, how did it? Just go for it. How did you get to this point now?
Um, well, it was a few years of, you know, again, thinking, it was really conflicting hearing this call over and over and over again and knowing in my soul that this is what I belong doing and this is the path that I belong going down. And, for me as an LPN, to continue to become a certified nurse midwife, I would have had to start completely over from scratch. I went to a trade school, technical
Mhm.
school. So I didn't have any college credits, just a fancy diploma piece of
Sure.
paper, another fancy piece of paper. It was the first piece of paper that people told me didn't amount to shit. So
Ah.
that should have been my first clue. Um, but yeah, so I would have had to start over. I would have had to go through prerequisites.
Mhm.
I would have had to go for my bachelor's in nursing, become a registered nurse, and then I would have had to go, another 2, 3 years, whatever, depending on the program, to get certified as a nurse midwife. And I didn't have the time or the money. And at that point, I had already not aligned with the medical field and the role as a nurse. Like I've been, I haven't identified as a nurse or with that role in quite some time. So it just never felt right. Um, but that is all I knew.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything other than that. So, yes, we found a episode of the same show you were mentioning just a minute ago, Crow, and he had this lovely lady on, Maryn Green, who is co-founder of Indie Birth Midwifery School, and it just opened up this whole new world to me. It really genuinely changed my life. And I just remember listening to it and going, it all made sense. And I just like instantly realized why I was never able to move forward before.
Mhm.
Um, the pieces just kind of like came together all of a sudden during this interview with her. And that comes back to what I was saying earlier in the episode, is that everything is a choice. And that was the day that I realized that I had options and I did have a choice, and that I didn't need to go down the nurse midwifery rabbit hole and sell my soul to a system that I don't align with. So it was about a year. I think I read everything that I could find about indie birth, and I became a part of their little social network. Uh, and I just tried to get involved and get a feel for them as people and an organization in general. And the time came where they had a retreat in Oahu. That was just this past January, and it was answering the call to radical midwifery, and it was just absolutely eye-opening and so special and sacred to sit in a circle with like-minded women and the radical birth curious. um, and yeah, that's basically how I came. I had this phenomenal experience with these amazing women, um, and they are having another one. I do want to mention that they are having another retreat in October, this October, again in stunning Oahu. So if anybody is interested in learning more about radical birth and radical midwifery, birth work, definitely check it out. You just will not regret it at all. But yeah, that was really the nail in the coffin. I came home and I think I applied for their midwifery program before I even left the island, before I came back home. So that was it. I just knew that I had found my people.
It's usually what happens for most people. They come to the realization that they do have options, that they're there's not a dead end street, even though it feels like it might be. That's often the push to, telling you that you should just keep pushing forward with at least being there mentally, and then they realize it before they get like, this is it. I know it. I can feel it. I could tell you where it was time. I mean, once we heard that interview, that was enough.
Yeah,
But then you actually got to, have this magical experience. Let's just call it that. Going to
it
Hawaii,
was
the whole thing,
absolutely magical. Yeah.
and then that was it, and you're on the path now. So eventually we'll have you back on to talk about the experience of you now being in the seat of it. But let's slow down for a second now, because this is clearly not the last episode of any of this stuff. We're kind of just getting into the ideas. I want to have you on again to talk about more about the history of things and how the hell did we get to this point. If anyone has
Mm.
seen my episode, Unholy Trinities, I discussed the idea of Shakespeare, King James, and how they really helped things along as far as getting essentially the entire world convinced that witches are old, disgusting hags that are just making terrible trouble for people constantly. And that, of course, to, there's a need. There's a need to find people that call themselves witches and warlocks, and potentially make sure that men were handling all the births from then on, because that's one way to control things. And look where it's hundreds of years later, but look where we are now. I have a very strong feeling that was really the big push for it, the start for it, because before then, well, first of all, before then you had community, you had neighbors, and that whole postpartum thing we were talking about. If let's say the husband wasn't there to take care of the kids for half a day, you'd probably have your neighbor or your relative who lived right next door, or maybe even in the same house. I mean, things were just so much different, you know. And
Yeah.
nobody's saying we have to go back to this time of tribes, but the tribal concepts are a big part of what keeps humankind as amazing as it is, and as as flourishing as it is, to have support. It's just not there in a lot of ways nowadays. And we went from a place where I didn't see any kids hanging out in the street. Now we're somewhere where there's kids hanging out all over the street. It's wonderful to see. And this is, there's pockets of it, but times have changed. And change is actually a really big part of what you're doing. You're making changes for the better, for the perception of midwifery in general, and the overall acceptance of it, and the concept that it's not this, this symptom that you have a child coming and now you're going to suffer. It's none of that. Everything happens the way it's supposed to happen, almost 100% of the time. So maybe if you want to, we can probably end with talking about our home birth experience, and
Sure.
where it landed us and how we got to see things and on both sides of the coin, so to speak.
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say that it really hasn't been that long where like this real medicalized model of pregnancy care has come into play,
Mm,
because it really was not that long ago where women were still birthing in their homes, and that was very normal.
right.
So yeah, that was just part of this last go around, the early 1900s, I think.
Yeah. Well,
It
that's
really
when
hasn't been that long.
most of the so-called Rockefeller medicine took over for just about everything,
Right.
Department of Education style things included. And we will get into that in our next episode, a little bit more of the history and the mystery,
I just wanted to
particularly.
clarify the timing.
Sure.
It really hasn't been that long. It kind of is going along with like this very quick, technologically advancing
Mhm.
culture that is not ours. It doesn't
No.
belong to us. None of this belongs to
No.
us. And childbirth is just one thing that they have
No.
tried to take away from us. So
You're right. And I think really but think, let's put this perspective on it. It is going to take hundreds of years for this kind of switch. It's completely unnatural. Most people will fight back against it. It's taken this long to completely inculcate
sure,
billions of people. Billions of people are convinced of the opposite of the real spiritually obvious truth. Nature and natural, radical, right? This is the way to go. And it's only radical now because it hasn't been this way in the norm for as long as it has been. But you're 100% right. It only, technically recently has this ridiculously huge change happened. But it took this long. And again, go back to my episode if you guys haven't seen Unholy Trinities. I think there's a lot of actual groundwork context for this conversation without even meaning to. But a lot of German thought has entered our landscape culturally, whether it's the music that we got with most classical music coming from Austria, Germany, changing the way we see and think and hear and feel music. And same thing for this. Nothing bad. Germany's amazing. I love the language. But even the word germ, it's funny how Germany has such a huge impact on us since like 1850. All the philosophy that people are very quick to throw into a conversation, it's all coming from there. So stay tuned for more on that. We're definitely going to have a nice talk about that and see what several or many more than that events led to this eventual takeover of birth. I just can't even believe I'm saying that, It's such a crazy thing to even mention, but it has been
yeah, it
taken
sounds
over.
really crazy.
It sounds crazy
Yeah.
that you can convince women to go against their own instincts, because you all have the instinct. Even if you accidentally got pregnant at 15, you still have the instincts, the maternal instincts, and they've managed to actually get you to fight your own natural instincts and potential knowledge. You're fighting your own knowledge. Like, I haven't studied that. I don't have the knowledge. No, you have ancient memory, and that kicks in. I assume. I don't know, of course, but I assume that kicks in, and that seems to be part of what's being discussed, at least at some level. Okay, why don't we end with our last experience? We had a home birth about a year and a half ago. Take it from there.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Well, in
So,
in the context of the idea that it's whether you go to a hospital or not, it doesn't mean that things are going to go smoothly and perfectly, no matter how much planning or spiritual awareness you have.
no, I mean, such are the laws of nature. In the natural world, we see things come up unexpectedly all the time. It's just a part of life. And to think that, things can't come up and that everything is just going to be great, it's just naive, because it's not always the case. And much, if not most of the time, true undisturbed physiological birth does go smooth, and you don't need hands on these women. And there is instinct and intuition and guidance from within. But that's such a rare occurrence these days to have that type of undisturbed and respected and honored space. That is a tremendous part of the problem. But things happen sometimes that you don't expect or see coming. And in my case, I was a rare case. But yeah, I was a rare case because it isn't something that happens very frequently. I had a pretty severe postpartum hemorrhage, and I did receive medication to stop my bleeding, and there were a lot of things that happened to stop my bleeding and to stabilize me. But I mean, that goes back to me, the importance of feeling safe and building your birth team, a team that you trust. I had discussions around postpartum hemorrhage with my midwives prior to it happening. Speaking of, on the topic of intuition, I just knew that I knew that I was going to bleed. I knew at first I knew that everything was going to end up okay. Like, I wasn't like, oh my God, I wasn't like
Yeah.
freaking out, but I just like I've always had intuitive vision, and I've always been very connected to that aspect of my spirituality. And I just knew that I didn't know what it was, but I knew there was going to be something. And I just knew that my birth was not going to go smoothly. And then later on in my pregnancy, I found out that I was slightly anemic, and very slightly anemic. But as soon as I found out, and it really, I mean, it was not a big deal, but I knew that that was going to be it. Like, once I found that out, I don't know why, I was like, I'm going to bleed. And I did. I didn't have a lot of anxiety revolving around it. Like, I kind of accepted that was a possibility, and I knew that it was gonna. I just had that gut feeling anyway, so I wasn't really surprised when it happened. But I did, prepare myself mentally and spiritually for it, and I did have in-depth conversations with my midwives about their protocol and what would happen in the event that something would come up. And so I trusted that everything was going to be okay, and it was. and it is. And I still would never choose a hospital birth. If I'm ever faced with the decision again, I'm still going to choose to birth at home. And, that's because I know my choices now. And I know that everything is a choice. But yeah, I think that it's important to make it clear that just because you are in a position where you support and honor physiological birth and um, birth choices doesn't mean that you are natural or nothing.
Hmm.
Um, there are a lot of people that there's a lot of judgment just for absolutely everything nowadays, right? So, there's a lot of judgment around women who make certain choices. And, you know, I think that the take home message is that my standpoint on it all, it comes down to choice and informed consent and knowing your options and having somebody, if you feel like you want or need somebody to walk alongside of you, um, and honor that with you. So
Yeah, it was quite an experience, to be there right after the birth. I'm holding the tiniest baby possible, and there's
it
an IV
wasn't
up
tiny.
there. Well, for me, I used your fourth birth, so for that was the littlest baby I've held.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, Ruby was tiny. You're right. But in the moment, the thing is, like, that's what I mean, though. You're usually
Yeah, I know
so
what
much
you
better
mean.
right away, and now
This
suddenly I'm holding the baby, and you're in the next room, and we had an IV up in the house. It's not like there was nothing there. Again, to mention how it's not just natural or nothing. It really does not need to be that way at all. And nobody said it has to be. It's just more misconceptions that come out of the stigmas that are created for these exact moments. But we did end up at the hospital for a little bit, and it wasn't perfect there. That's for sure. There were some
right.
very, very interesting things that come up, and we certainly don't have to be long-winded about it whatsoever. But we didn't have the accommodations that I thought we were going to have, as far as wheelchair access and things of that nature. Um, there was no. Before I get there, they thankfully our midwife walked through the door with us and got us right in, and she gave us a kind warning ahead of time that they're going to address our baby because it was a home birth. Tell them, what do they call our baby and every other baby like that?
A dirty baby.
A dirty baby, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like a racist slang. It's just such a negative way to say something. It's crazy. And I certainly had not
Yeah.
heard of that term ahead of time. I did not know that. So that was a relative surprise. Nothing happy about that. And we weren't there forever. It was okay. The experience was okay overall. We're not here to bash hospitals. We know what's wrong with it and what isn't. And you know more than most people. But they did put tubes in the baby when we were not there, and they
Yeah.
waited for us to leave.
Yeah.
This is a warning to anyone else. Don't leave the baby alone if you want nothing done without you seeing. What did they do? What happened there? What was that?
Yeah. So going back a second, um, we ended up in the hospital for separate reasons, not
Hmm.
related to my hemorrhage.
Hmm.
I was stabilized at home. I didn't need an ambulance called or anything like that.
Right.
Um, so I was I was taken care of, but we ended up in the NICU for separate reasons. And yeah, the NICU was a terrible experience. Um, it was a terrible experience, and just one of the problems that we had with the staff was that before a doctor even came in, we had been there all day, and no doctor, we were at a teaching hospital, no resident, um, no white coats came in to talk to us or discuss our son's care plan with us. And we were there all day. And we finally left the unit. We were gone about an hour to finally use the bathroom because there were no bathrooms on the unit. You had to go off of the unit to use the bathroom.
Right.
And so we finally left to use the bathroom and to go eat something, to go get lunch. And we came back, and our son had a nasogastric tube placed that they waited for us to leave so they could do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we weren't told, never asked. And because we had a dirty baby, right? Or maybe not. Maybe that's their protocol. Hey, make sure that you get it done when they're not there.
I don't know.
I don't know.
It
I
could
don't
have
even want to
been.
know.
It could have been 1,000. There could be 1,000 reasons. And,
Uh-huh. I think they knew we were on the fringe outskirts of wanting to be there to begin with. And they probably said
well, I
avoid them at
mean,
all costs, I guess. Meanwhile,
I
this would
mean
have
that would
cost the
have been
entire
a safe
thing.
assumption. A home birth transfer. Like, yeah, we had no intentions on being in the hospital, so yeah, of course we don't want to be there.
Hmm.
You know,
Maybe that has something to do with it.
nobody has to guess. It's like,
No, no, I mean, and we were discussing understaffing earlier, and
yeah,
there was clear understaffing going on here, and it was at a time when people were well done with their hospital jobs and they were out, or they were being kicked out for not taking the shot or not wearing a mask or whatever. And this had a large effect on. Now we were conscripted to the lobby bathroom, actually, which I don't think is the best case scenario for a woman who just had a pregnancy. It's just right off the top of my head there. It's really not optimal. Certainly isn't the proper care, and just my opinion. I'm sure you feel similarly about it, and anyone listening, leave a comment, please. How do you feel about that? How would you feel if your wife just had a baby, she's in a wheelchair because she's very low on energy, and you have to go to the same bathroom that anyone who just happens to show up uses? And that in that bathroom, we had no wheelchair access. We had to go through a fairly, I don't know why it was, but it was such a dark hallway. We had to go down this dark hallway right out of the NICU. And there was no, the door wasn't, usually you press buttons in a hospital, the door opens for you. We didn't have that. We would have had to go really far out of our way to get to the bathroom with the wheelchair doors. And then we had to go to this one bathroom where there's a little L hallway that barely fits a wheelchair. If you needed to turn around, you couldn't. You had to back all the way out of it. It was very hard to get you to this bathroom. It just seems crazy to me that you don't get your own bathroom when you have a baby. And dirty baby or not, it would have been the same if we had the birth there. So I
well,
was
I
fairly
mean,
surprised.
but like we were saying, the postpartum period is there's nothing sacred about it. There's no attention to recovery and care, and honoring a woman that has just gone through this entered this complete liminal space, and brought a new soul into this world. There's just, oh, you think you're the only one? Get back to work.
Yeah.
It's really the mindset,
Yeah.
that we have a lot in this culture. So
You're right about that. And we love, the world. We grew up where we grew up, whatever. There's plenty of amazing people all around. And that fact proves itself every single day. And but there is an unfortunate, probably very small group of people that have made sure that the world is what it is now. And they're not going to win, but as of right now, they're doing decently. It's hard to talk to people about certain topics. You can't even really open up to somebody without them thinking you're crazy. And I'm obviously completely crazy. And it's such a shame. that we can't just have a conversation with someone, just a good old fashioned conversation. It's kind of my goal on this show is that I don't say the things that I try to be very specific about in certain other ways. That way I can open up conversation. I want conversation. And I want people to think about something and find out more on their own rather than just listen to me or you talk and be like, well, that's the answer. It's not. It's not. There's there's much more. Human beings are so complex to begin with. And there's just so much more to any set of information. There's always more. There's always more to learn. It doesn't matter how much experience you get with something. There's always going to be something that proves that you don't know everything. And the more people take that approach, I think the quicker people will grow and learn. Because again, in this part of the world, this neck of the woods, I think there was a humongous stagnation in overall personal growth, spiritual growth, and knowledge in general. There was a lot of, well, I'm working 60 hours a week. I'm just going to gamble on sports and play video games all day. And I deserve it and I don't care. Meanwhile, they have kids. They're doing other things, you know. There's it limits you from being able to learn or grow at all. But it's what they tell you to do. You know, it's not love thy neighbor, it's compete with thy neighbor so you have lots and they don't have much at all. And then don't help them if, you know, if they have to move a couch or something. It's so crazy and backwards. It's just I don't remember once any kind of team building, loving work that ever happened at any schooling I've ever taken. I just remember somebody being like, "Can the head guy do all the work?" And then we all got the same grade. That would make me very happy. I need to cheat on my test. I had no time to study. I've been teaching kids for a long time now, and hardly any of them had an appropriate amount of time to even think for themselves. Now, it's fine to want kids to do a lot of stuff, but when you've got, you know, two sports and three instruments, and then they're telling me they don't have time for friends or even television, I don't want them to have television, but I was shocked to hear how few kids were actually playing video games. They didn't have
Mhm.
time to do that. So it starts young now. They want to make sure that your time is completely occupied and that you have so little time to even think that you're not going to ever open a book. And of course, you're going to end up getting drunk with somebody by the time the weekend hits because you can't, you know, TGIF, you know what I mean? TGIF culture.
Right.
Anyway, that little rant was basically me just saying that there's big, huge problems with the overall mental status of almost everyone, us included. Nobody's perfect, and nobody is taught to embrace themselves or to brace for the future by learning as much as you possibly can about the world you live in. There's so much to know and so little time. And I personally think I lost a few years just doing whatever I was doing with music. And yeah, I played lots of video games. I lost a lot of time there, I think. I gained something from it, but not as much as I put in, you know? And a lot of people are in my situation. And now it's time for all of us to learn from especially from the past few years and from the past few decades, and to learn, grow, think outside the box and realize that there's so much more to everything. And somebody like you can inspire a lot of other people, in my opinion, to do just that because you're always growing. You never stop. You've never stagnated once. And even if you have personally felt like there was a time of turmoil mentally, you used it as an opportunity. And I know you did because it always seems like there's the ebb and flow and you come out of it. And I can tell that you realize that you grew and I love seeing it, you know, and me personally, I feel like I really stagnated. So having you, in my life for the past almost 10 years now, in case anyone was interested, it's helped me broaden my horizons and perspectives and make me a better person too. So I appreciate you for being you. And I hope that a lot of people got an idea about who you are today because you're certainly going to be back on this show and we've got a lot more to talk about. But I think we had a really good kind of overall discussion about why people should at least, if they're considering having a child, whether they've had one or not yet, look into all of your options. You have a lot of control and power over how it goes. And somebody like you can be an integral part in getting them into that world and starting to, give them some ideas, some references,
Sure.
some ideas. And that's where we have your display name here. Why don't you tell them where they can contact you if anyone wants to say hi or ask questions or even
Yeah.
do the work?
So I'm on Instagram right now at Petricola Philetiformist. And I am on Telegram under the same name. Yeah, if you need guidance, if you're in need of birth support, um, definitely reach out to me. I am, taking birth clients, postpartum clients, and um, I've been tossing around the idea of traveling, so I am open to traveling. So that could be an option too, if you're in need. So
That's great. That's great to hear. And it's been really kind of surreal having you, on this camera here. Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's so it's been I've been really looking forward to this, and
I
I
hope I
think
lived
we
up to your
well, I think we
expectations.
covered a lot of topics actually that were very appropriate and coming from a place of experience. We're not just both sitting here talking about stuff that we have heard about or read about or heard somebody else talk about. You've had a lot of firsthand experience with basically everything we talked about today. So it's incredible because most people don't get out of the system. It's either that they feel like they're too old or they just never see the truth for what it is. It's something to think about. And I hope I left you guys with something to think about by having this amazing guest. And just know she'll be back many more times. There's plenty more to talk about here. And maybe we'll kind of get some progress reports from you as we're doing stuff.
Sure, that'd be
We have
great.
we have plans to homeschool. I have a feeling we can end up getting information out to other people who are planning on doing that as we learn through the whole process. It's going to be all kinds of learning and things that come up because of that. And yes, please look forward to plenty more interviews just like this and all the kinds of episodes you've come to expect from the show soon. And please find me on Rockfin. This particular one won't be an exclusive, but I'm going to be doing more and more exclusives as I do find that YouTube isn't necessarily giving back, but Rockfin certainly is. And hopefully you can find me there. I'm also on Patreon to support our work. And if you can't support it monetarily, then simply watching and sharing this with people you think might be interested is way more than enough. And I really appreciate everything. I'm very close to 1,000 followers on Rockfin, and it's happening fairly quickly. So I'm definitely going to have, backed by popular demand, Spiro Gin is coming back for more, for more all kinds of well-rounded talks about all kinds of things. That's something that's coming up very soon. So I hope you look forward to that, and I'm certainly looking forward to it also. Plenty more to come. Thank you so much, guys. Look forward to bringing you another episode very soon.